Hello YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Sorry about no video last week. Things just got kind of busier than I expected them to, and I ended up spacing on the fact that I needed to do one. That happens from time to time. But I do have a book to review for you today, and this is a slightly asynchronous, out of order return to my series on Booker Prize winners, which I didn't really intend to do. I just saw this book in the bookstore and I wanted to read it, and then I noticed afterwards that it was a Booker Prize winner. From 1988, it is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, a British-Japanese author who is very highly celebrated. This book came out a lot later than I realized. I'd certainly heard of it, but I didn't realize it came out as late as 1988 because it deals with sort of old-fashioned ideas. You know, it's about a butler named Stevens, and he basically belongs to this household where it's changed hands from an old English aristocrat to a modern kind of American businessman. And he still works for the same household. He's given a kind of hiatus from his work for a little vacation to go on a drive across the country down to Cornwall to try to reconnect and solicit the services of his former housekeeper coworker. Who is, they used to work together years and years ago, and she left to get married, and he kind of needs some more help around the house because they have a much reduced staff of what they used to have, and he wants to go and reconnect with her. They used to have a good relationship and kind of bring her back into the household. And while he's on this like 5-day drive, he's kind of reminiscing and talking about his life as a butler, his employment, his employer, the various moments that he remembers between him and the former housekeeper. And they talk about that a lot. And as you may know if you watch my channel, I'm something of an Anglophile. I love the Jeeves and Wooster books. I love butlers. And so this is a perfect, right up my alley sort of book. I found the discussion of kind of the changing British society, where it went from this kind of aristocratic system to a little bit more modern system, the falling out of fashion of the old ways, this kind of, the duties of a butler and the decorum of a butler, the keeping up of appearances sort of changing over the course of time. Very interesting. I loved all that and found the character fascinating as well. You learn a lot about him. And one of the things I think Ishiguro does really well is kind of uses subtext. He doesn't really, the butler is very stoic and he doesn't really talk about his feelings, but you kind of get a sense of what's going on under the surface. And one of the first discussions in the book is about what makes a good butler, and it's about dignity, and it's about maintaining your composure in all cases and being professional at all times, and not letting personal sentiment or emotion get in the way of your duties. It's really very duty focused, and Stevens has a line about how he thinks only the English have the temperament for this sort of job. He says the continental Europeans, the Spanish and the French and the Italians are too hot-headed and emotional. They're not able to suppress their emotions to the extent you need to in order to be a proper English butler. So he talks about that a lot, and he talks about histories of very famous butlers who were considered very good at their job because they were able to kind of put aside personal feeling and sentiment and get on with the business of it. There's a sort of apocryphal anecdote about a butler who finds a tiger in the drawing room and deals with the tiger without batting an eye, basically. And that's considered to be the epitome of having dignity and being a good butler. The butler's employer is this old English aristocrat that was operating during the Second World War, and one of the things I like is how he's handled, because the butler never criticizes him at all. He would be totally out of place to criticize his employer in any way. He would never do that, but there's little hints, and you kind of get the sense, more and more explicit as the book goes on, that the employer was maybe Nazi sympathizer is too strong a word, but he was certainly naive about what the Nazis were doing, and he wanted to kind of have a peace at any cost approach and wanted to negotiate, and he had several kind of Nazi officials in his house to kind of try to negotiate a peace deal, and he was very heavily attacked for that afterwards, and basically run out of town on a rail because of his sympathies with the Nazis or his insufficient antagonism towards the Nazis. So, but you get that sense of the butler's never going to say anything bad about his employer. He's just totally out of character to do that. He would never do that. But you kind of get the sense that the employer had some very flawed judgment, to say the least, which is very interesting. And then there's an anecdote in which the butler's father, who is, was an under butler, and he kind of taught him the profession and did it before him, is dying. And it's in the middle of a kind of an important event at the house, and Stevens is basically required to continue to do his job and fulfill his duties while his father is upstairs dying and he's not really able to attend him or be there at the crucial moments. And he looks back on that incident with not with regret, but with pride, because he considers it a fulfillment of his dignity of being a good butler to have put aside his personal feelings and to have done his job in that kind of difficult circumstance. He thinks that's something he's really proud about himself of. So that's sort of what the story is. And you know, you can read it a number of different ways. I was reading some commentary on it and some kind of analysis of it, and a lot of people seem to read this book as very overtly critical of British society and pointing out that the old ways were bad and wrong, and that the Stevens has sort of missed his life because he was so focused on doing his duty and, you know, living his life as a butler, that he didn't have time for personal relationships, and he didn't have time for family, and he kind of, you know, missed out on all the stuff that he could have been doing because he was so focused on this. And this is seen as an outmoded way of thinking and a criticism of how the British are, that they're not sufficiently in touch with their you know, the work-life balance sort of thing, perhaps. That's one way to read it. I didn't really read it that way. I think, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm an Anglophile and I sympathize with Stevens, but I kind of saw his point of view on it, and I thought he had a point. And it's not necessarily how I would want to live my life, but I can understand why someone would value that and think it's important. And I don't think it's necessarily a mistake to want to live your life that way if that's what's important to you. If you take pride in your work and you take pride in being a, you know, you derive your self-worth from being a very good, solid butler, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I saw it as just sort of a different way of being. And the fact that, you know, Stevens doesn't seem to have regrets about his life. He seems to be very satisfied with how he's conducted himself over his life. And I think that's fine. I feel like there's a tendency in modern readers particularly, but I mean, this is 1988, so it's pretty modern, but a tendency in modern readers to trying to assume that everybody is like them and has the same priorities and the same worldview, and they have a hard time kind of empathizing or understanding someone with a very different set of values. And I think this is a case where, you know, the modern reader who reads this book is going to say, oh, Stevens is clearly wrong. He's you know, put his faith in the wrong things. He's got his priorities all out of whack. He should have done things differently. But to someone like him who has a different set of values and who comes from an older mode, I don't think that's the right interpretation. At least that's not the interpretation I had. I can imagine a character in a book who has wildly different values than I have and who is perfectly happy with those values. And I don't think that, you know, it's right to just say, well, that's wrong, and then he should have been living his life this way. That was just my take on it. I thought it was interesting because that's, you know, I read the book first and I had my interpretation, and then I went on to like Wikipedia and other sites to read a bit about what other people were saying, and I found that I was not wholly in agreement with them. I mean, I think there's certainly social commentary in the book, and there's probably criticisms you can make about the British society, but I don't take quite as negative a view as a lot of the critics of it. And I really enjoyed the book. I think the prose is very good. It's quite short. It's an easy read. But the prose is very precise and very good. And I just, it's a theme that I find really interesting. I find the kind of older society and the creeping modernity that's sort of changing everything. And, you know, the transition from aristocracy to more of a meritocratic system was very interesting. And I just, I like the Englishness of it all. I found it very fun. So of all the Booker Prize novels that I've read so far, this might be my favorite. I really like this one. I could see myself reading it again. I think there's more to get out of it than just a single reading. There's a lot going on here, even though it's quite short. But again, it's all subtext, which I really like. I think it's nice when not everything is quite spelled out to you. And you get Stevens's interactions with various other people across the English countryside and the Cornish countryside, who are much more working class and much more unfamiliar with sort of the world that he has lived in and that he works in. So I think that, you know, it was a really interesting read, and that kind of clash of cultures is fascinating. So I really loved The Remains of the Day. I'll have to see the film version by Merchant Ivory. It's got some very good people in it. I'll have to check that out. But I haven't seen it yet. I'm interested as well in reading other books by Kazuo Ishiguro. If you've read some, please let me know in the comments and let me know which ones are good. I'd like to hear more about him. And that's all I have for this book for today. So if you have anything to say about it, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And please check back next Wednesday for another book review. I'll make sure to get one up then. And if you enjoyed the review, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications. I'll be back next time. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I'll catch you later.